One of the misconceptions of our business is that we're for sober people. And it couldn't be more untrue. We're actually for people that drink. Non-alcoholic spirits are a way for people that love cocktails just to drink more cocktails without the downsides of too much alcohol. 9 times out of 10, the bro culture would kick in of like, dude, what's wrong with you? Why are you not drinking? Come on, man. Just like have a, and 9 times out of 10, you go, all right, fuck it. Just, fine. I've been, fortunately and unfortunately, a part of a machine that has worked and spent billions of dollars to convince people like, hey, if you're looking to have a good time, to celebrate, or to relax, or to even mourn, alcohol is the centerpiece of that show. Starting a business, especially a consumer business, you realize that's the easy part. Staying alive is the hard part.
If you're new here, welcome. I'm excited that you joined us. Every single week, I get to sit down with CEOs, leaders, founders, builders who are doing something really fantastic on the planet. They're building a business that's making a difference in other people's lives. And I get the opportunity to sit down and chat with them and learn how they're doing it, the lessons, the failures, the opportunities, and they're going to leave you and me every single week with some nugget, mini nuggets actually, that you can integrate, implement into your business to do the same thing. So I'm glad you're here. Sit back, let's get into it.
Welcome to the Brand Laboratory. I'm Deevo, your host, and excited to bring on my next guest today. Today's guest didn't just launch a brand, they created an entirely new category, my type of people. Imagine for a second, if you will, stepping away from a high-profile career, making a boatload of money in advertising, where you worked on some of the world's most iconic brands, only to build something that most people didn't even know they needed. That's exactly what this next guest, Milan Martin, is doing. As the founder and CEO of the Free Spirit Company, Milan didn't just enter the spirit industry, he flipped it on its head. Free spirits isn't just about cutting out alcohol, which is sort of like a growing trend across, at least in America here, which I did not know, by the way, until I started doing some research on this. But it's about giving people control over how they drink, what they drink, and how they consume. And the challenge is, how do you get drinkers to buy into a non-alcoholic spirit brand when predominantly most people don't, even though there is a shifting trend? So in this episode of the Brand Laboratory, I'm going to dive into what it really takes to build a brand in a market that doesn't have a lot of stranglehold yet, or a lot of strength. The storytelling, the positioning, the fight for relevance, and the moments where it all could have fallen apart, because as entrepreneurs, we know this is sort of a daily risk if we're not setting ourselves up properly, which is why branding and your messaging is really important. Milan's journey is proof that sometimes the biggest opportunities are not found just in trends, they're found in changing the way people think. Again, that's back to your messaging, right? What do I want you to gain from this episode? I'm hoping by the end of this episode, you will have learned how to position your brand in a crowded or completely new market, in Milan's case. Why branding isn't just about selling a product, it's about shifting people's perceptions. Again, how perception is reality. So how do people perceive what you do? What value do you bring to the table? And the biggest mistakes that brands make when introducing something completely new to the marketplace. And then the final piece that I hope you walk away with today, and I'm sure there's going to be other nuggets that we don't even cover, but these are sort of my theme for the show, is how to get people to care about what you're creating, even when they don't know they need it yet. So that's what the purpose of today's show is. Milan's going to be a fantastic guest. If you are an entrepreneur, here's my shameless plug. If you're an entrepreneur, you're a brand builder, or you're someone trying to cut through the noise in your marketplace, this episode will change the way you think about branding, storytelling, and consumer psychology. So I'm really excited to share this with you. So let's get into it. All right. Milan, welcome to the show, man. I really appreciate you taking the time to join the Branding Laboratory.
It's good to be here, man.
Yeah, so I've been watching your onboarding deck for a few minutes now, and really actually excited about jumping into this space. I have a friend of mine who just he hasn't been drinking alcohol for years, and I'm a very light drinker, by the way, but I do like a good bourbon here and there. But I have not had a drink of alcohol now going on almost 6 months. Just I sort of like to test myself in these vectors to sort of make sure I don't have an addiction to anything, because
Yeah.
because I really like bourbon, and I was like, I've come home now 6 nights in a row and poured myself an old fashioned, and I'm starting to drink too much, I think. So I cut it off just to make sure I didn't have a problem. But anyhow, that being said, I'm front and center. I really want to talk to you about this new business that you are setting up or have set up already. And I think what I'm most intrigued about is you jumped into a market that doesn't really have a lot of saturation and a lot of popularity, the non-alcoholic beverage. So you were working in the corporate world for a while doing specific stuff, and you decided to break free from that. Can you kind of start from there, what you were doing, and then now what you're doing?
Yeah, man, I spent 20 some odd years in the advertising business, and I love the business, man. The advertising business was a super fun, super creative way of spending 20 years and learning how the world works, learning how marketing works, learning how people think. And kind of along the way, personally, it's one of those kind of work hard, drink harder businesses. And
Mm.
there were more than a handful of times, professionally and personally over 20, 30 years where I was just overserved. And the aha moment for me was I was running an agency here on the West Coast. And, I left that world to do something different. I didn't know what at the time. And, I got the opportunity to kind of decompress and to think. And one of the ahas that I landed on was, you know, uh, each and every time that I was, in one of those kind of being overserved situations, it was a result of, you and I being somewhere cool with great people, having great conversation, drinking delicious cocktails. You're drinking Manhattans, and your glass is empty, and I'm like, hey, Devo, man, like my round. You want another cocktail? And you're like, yeah, yeah, of course. And you end up, drinking more than you otherwise wanted to, not because you were craving more alcohol, not because you wanted to get more drunk, but just because of the ceremony of it, and being a part of it, and the energy of it, and the sociability of it, and all of that. And so the short answer is, I just kind of said, well, what if all that was true, and we love cocktails and we love drinking them, and we are happy to pay 15 or 20 bucks for a cocktail for some strange reason. But alcohol was, now optional. One of the misconceptions of our business is that we're for sober people, and it couldn't be more untrue. We're actually for people that drink, for people that drink cocktails. And non-alcoholic spirits are a way for people that love cocktails just to drink more cocktails without the downsides of too much alcohol.
Mm. So you just walked away from all of that and launched this new business.
Yes and no. I think a lot of times people think about the entrepreneurial journey as jumping off of a cliff.
Mm.
And it wasn't really like that for me. It was more kind of baby steps into the ocean,
Mhm.
where you did a couple things to execute on your idea. You brought it to life. You looked at, how do we make the liquid? What's the brand called? What's the category look like? How would we sell? Starting to kind of pull the trigger on, bringing some of that to life in really small steps for me at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. And, when you do that enough times, you take enough of those little baby steps, you get pretty far.
Mm.
And if you're kind of just taking baby steps into the ocean, all of a sudden you look back and you're like, whoa, I didn't realize how far offshore we were. We got really far out here, just with little steps and little strokes. And for me, it was almost punking myself into it, where, at one point you're out there, you're like, well, I guess it's too late to go back now.
Yeah. It reminds me of, when you say baby steps, it reminds me of the James Clear Atomic Habits, sort of
Oh
like
yeah.
not setting goals, but just sort of small incremental things in between here where you are and where you want to be, so that you can look back, like you
Like
said, wow,
1% a day or something.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm pretty far from the shore. I like that reference. What's the most common misconception people have about your brand and this category of alcohol-free spirits?
Yeah. I mean, I think most people think about it and they think, well, that's not for me because I'm not sober. And, it's one of these categories, and our brand is one of those brands where you don't get it until you get it. And the second you get it, you go, oh, right. And so it takes a little bit of explaining, where you're like, no, this is for people who love drinking cocktails. What if you've had one or two cocktails, but you're not ready to go home? You want to have a third or fourth cocktail, and you want to have something delicious and exciting. You don't want to have water or cranberry juice. That sucks. What if you're drinking and it's a Tuesday afternoon, you've got afternoon meetings, but having a cocktail at lunch with a friend or a client would be great. You know, what if you're going out big with your friends and you know that this group of friends, you always end up crushing 7 or 8 cocktails? That's a lot of alcohol. Well, what if every other one was a non-alcoholic margarita instead of a full alc margarita? And so, you know, I think ultimately, you know, the brand is there to go, oh man, just like do more of the things that you love to do. Now you've just got some optionality around reducing the downsides.
So it's not, it's really what I'm hearing you say. It's more about reduction, not necessarily omission is sort of the value add.
Yeah,
Is
we're
that
not a
fair to say?
teetotaler brand. We're a
Yeah.
brand that, you know, is more about giving people control and helping them moderate
Mm.
versus exactly to your point. It's not about abstinence. I mean, there's some customers that don't drink,
Mhm.
and that's fine. We're here for that. But by and large, it's really about, you know, helping the moderation movement.
So, and again, I don't know the answer to this, so forgive my questioning on it, but if I were to go to a bar today, I would be able to find something from your distribution within the bar itself. How do you control that, I guess, the distribution of it so that there's availability wherever I would go?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the big challenges early days for us was giving people the ability to discover it, right? And over the past 5 years of the business, we've made huge strides in being, you know, in all the places, the bars and restaurant, premium cocktail bars, and all of that, where, you know, you might walk in one night and say, you know what, I'm not drinking tonight. Just give me a water. And the bartender will say, well, what if I make you a non-alcoholic margarita? And you're like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. And it's a discovery. You're like, oh, that was really good. And,
Mm.
you know, actually, I felt great and I drove myself home. So, you know, I think it is all about those aha moments where consumers can kind of go, you know, I'm following the old path. We're putting this new thought in the way where you kind of go like, yeah, man, I had a bunch of cocktails last night and I feel like a champ today. And it's because I've been able to, you know, moderate how much alcohol I put in my body without compromising, you know, what I drank. Like you always had the choice not to drink,
Mm.
but what you would drink would be boring
Mm.
and kid like of, you know, a mocktail
Mm.
or you know, a Shirley Temple or a juice or a soda.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, you know, what we're talking about here are like honest to goodness, big, bold, adult, delicious cocktails with you know, with no alcohol, or in a lot of cases, what it gives you the ability to do is just lower the alcohol volume in your favorite cocktail. So if a margarita is made with, you know, 2 ounces of tequila, you make it with 1 ounce of tequila and 1 ounce of free spirits tequila. All of a sudden, you can drink double the cocktails without getting crushed.
So I actually have an event this coming Friday where I'll have I guess about 20 men. I run what I call the fire circle. It's just sort of like a man group where men can start building like camaraderie with other men because I
Sure.
feel like that's something that's really lacking.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah. Do you agree with me on that? That's not my question. I'm just curious. You agree with that? So you nod your
Yeah,
head.
no, I
Yeah.
think that you know, it's harder for men, especially as you get older, to make friends. So any you know, mechanism to get people together to form a
Yeah.
bond.
Yeah. I noticed that a sort of a budding awareness of that the last few years as I've kind of started to evolve who I am as a human and my business and all the things I noticed that surrounding myself with people and we're just it was a challenge finding people that were sort of in line with my personal beliefs and my philosophies. And I don't have to say that believe the same thing, but so anyhow, I started this fire circle and I won't go too many details on it. But so if I wanted to pick up some of these free spirits, non-alcoholic drinks and serve them at this event, I could just go over to my ABC store here in North Carolina and they would potentially sell that.
Yeah, so you know, the way we've built the business is, you know, aligned with the alcohol industry. So we're distributed largely by the same places and distributors, retailers and distributors that sell alcohol.
Mm.
So, you know, we've got big distributors in key states, and as we're a small business, we've got about 20 states that are lit up: Texas, California, you know, Illinois, Massachusetts, Pacific Northwest states. And we've also got a handful of national retailers, one of which is Total Wine and More, that you know, is able to buy directly from us because we're non-alcoholic and they've got a program to do that.
Mhm.
So we don't have a distributor in North Carolina, but we do have, a decent amount of distribution there simply because we've got a bunch of customers there that buy directly from us. So yeah, if you went to Total Wine and More, or even if you went to our website and looked up your zip code, you'd find it at, a lot of the retailers there.
That's brilliant. If you are looking for a distributor in North Carolina, I have some experience with that and some people I know that might be interested in chatting with you if you want to take this offline. I do know somebody who currently distributes quite heavily for Red Bull and some alcoholic beverage companies and beer, and quite prolific at doing it. So I only know because I had spoken to him about another brand we're working with to sort of help them with their distribution. So we could take it offline, but if you're interested, let me know.
Yeah.
A couple of things that sort of come to mind. This whole idea of overserved. At first, I was misunderstanding what you were saying, and now I realize overserved. You literally meant that in the terms of alcoholic. Your name, Free Spirits, is that sort of a by design double entendre, sort of like the freedom to do whatever you want, but it's also alcohol free? Is that sort of like the meaning behind the
Yeah.
name? Very.
Yeah. I mean, it's really rooted in the idea of, when I was a kid, in my 20s living in New York, the notion of not drinking. There was a handful of times as we all go through, you're like, I need to take a break, right?
Mm,
And that meant you either stayed home and didn't go out,
yeah.
or when you went to the bar, you ordered something like a cranberry juice or a water, and 9 times out of 10, the bro culture would kick in of like, dude, what's wrong with you? Why are you not drinking? Come on, man, just like have a, and 9 times out of 10, you go, all right, fuck it, just fine. And so, I think coming from the advertising world, I've been, fortunately and unfortunately, a part of the machine that has worked and spent billions of dollars to convince people like, hey, if you're looking to have a good time, to celebrate or to relax or to even mourn, alcohol is the centerpiece of that show.
Oh yeah. You
Alcohol
you
is
can't turn on a you literally, sorry to interrupt, you literally cannot turn on a TV show, a movie, or
no,
anything. And I've actually been calling this out to my partner every time we sit down to watch TV, which is very rarely.
yeah,
And whether it's a movie or a sitcom, there's always a moment where someone's pouring themselves something or drinking something. And I don't think people realize that that's intentionally placed in a subliminal context, like in literally every situation.
yeah, 100%. I mean, it's alcohol's still doing it like cigarettes used to do it, and it's a playbook, right? And I think that whether we believe it or not, we are all subject to that kind of influence. And I think for us, where you're kind of like you said, hey, you came home from work, it's been a long, long day. I want to pour myself, a bourbon. Are you thinking to yourself, man, I really need a buzz? Or are you just excited by the ceremony of it? And it's okay if it's a little bit of both. We're not like, hey, the buzz doesn't matter. Yeah, totally. It's all a part of it. But, I think that for us, it's really about, giving people the ability to, kind of shift the mind away from, if I want to celebrate, if I want to go party, if I want to relax, alcohol is the star player, to where, hey, maybe alcohol is a part of it,
Yeah.
but maybe not, and so ultimately, I think it's just a matter of, reframing it from the bro culture of, if you're not drinking, something's wrong with you, to, hey, when I see that Devo ordered a non-alcoholic margarita, the perception is one of positivity, of,
Yeah.
hey, good for him, man. He's taking care of himself, or he's being responsible, or maybe he's had a couple drinks. He's just trying to, keep things going. One of the most poignant memories I have of my advertising days was, we had a big, you know, multi-million dollar pitch, and the CEO of the agency was there. We made the pitch. I was a puppy. I was just a kid. And after the pitch, we were all at the bar. I ordered whatever I ordered, alcohol, alcoholic beer or whatever. And this guy ordered no duels.
Mhm.
And I remember instantly thinking, not with judgment, but just instantly thinking, oh, he's an alcoholic. Right. So if
That was still a judgment.
yeah, no, it's fair enough. It was definitely a judgment.
I'm working on judgments right now as one of my evil sides of me. I'm like so I'm like, that's still a judgment though, bro.
Totally. Well, no, I mean, fair enough. But I guess at the end of the day, it was so immediate, right? You kind of go, if somebody's drinking a non-alcoholic whatever, that means they must have a problem, right? Versus kind of what we're trying to do is, no, man, the perception is quite the opposite of, hey, maybe he's got a problem. I don't know. It's not my business, but he's just like, doesn't want to put alcohol in his body, but he still wants to celebrate, or whatever all those positive associations are.
Yeah, I totally get you on that one because I've actually made the same observations. Well, I say that when my partner gets mad, I'm like, they're not judgments, they're just observations. But I've made those same observations similar to what you said. What I love about some of the things you're saying right now is that you don't take the moral high ground on it, and that's I think that's really important in today's culture because I think people do feel a little bit judged if they kind of step outside the normal protocol of sort of like bar etiquette or party etiquette. I wonder, how do you deal with sort of the psychology of inhibition around this? Because I know a lot of people are not comfortable in public spaces, especially now in today's social media culture, and everybody's operating in these virtual silos. Look at us, and they go to parties, they go to events, and they always are like, I just need a drink to relax. Or like, I've been with women before that are like, yeah, I'll just let me get a couple drinks in me, and I'm like, why do you need a couple? Let's just be yourself, man. Why you gotta have like all these crazy psychological things around that? What's your space around that? And sort of, because this, from my perspective, that lends itself into marketing and advertising and sort of like, how do you change the cultural psychology, the perception, right? It's a perception thing. How do you change the cultural perception of alcohol, non-alcohol, so that people don't feel guilty about it, but they also don't think that they need the alcohol to lower their inhibition so they can be themselves?
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, I think there's an element of it that's exactly what we were just talking about, which is, you believe what you're told when it's repeated in media time and time again. And it's like, hey, if you really want to let loose and have a good time, alcohol needs to be a part of the equation, and at the same time, sure, are there people that are going to be more free-spirited when they've had a couple of drinks? But I think that ultimately the thing that people get confused is, after a couple drinks, are they themselves, and are those really authentic conversations? Listen, we've all had those big crazy nights where you're just in an intense conversation with somebody because you've had a bunch of cocktails, and man, you're just like philosophizing and talking and sharing and all of that kind of stuff. You kind of wake up the next day and like,
what did I say?
You're like, right? Was that a genuine human connection, or was that just a bunch of like blithering crap?
You not only wake up the next day, but you wake up next to somebody you might not recognize in some cases.
Totally. For sure. And again,
not to say I've had those moments, Milan. I'm just saying.
Sure, none of us have. That's terrible. No, but I mean, like you said, it's not said in a judgmental way. Like, we've all been there. And again, our whole point is that maybe a cocktail does loosen you up with alcohol. But there's too much of a good thing, right? It's ultimately, it's like, if we do a lot of work in the dry dating space, right? Dry dating is kind of the new trend. There's groups and specific platforms for it, and a lot written about it, and so we're not necessarily like, oh, drinking while dating is bad. It's just more like, yeah, maybe to your point, maybe one cocktail is great, but 3 or 4, maybe not so much.
Yeah.
But you still want to kind of like drink exciting things and all of that. Because at the end of the day, you think about a cocktail, it is the most irrational purchase you can make.
Oh, it's poison. You're literally putting poison in your body.
And even on top of that, it's $15 or $20 for 3 ounces of liquid. Right. And when you think about that, you're like, is that really a rational purchase? Whereas, like, you might be out shopping for a pair of jeans, and if that pair of jeans is $100, you're like, whoa, that's $100 for a pair of jeans. That pair of jeans will last you years.
Yeah.
Whereas your bar bill, you'll slap down $100 bar bill, no problem. And it's ultimately because of the perception of what a cocktail is. You're like, ooh, which bourbon, am I using? Where's that from? What's the story of that distillery? Where's the bitters from? Who's mixing it up? Where am I? What's the music? You're buying the experience of it. So, ultimately, I think we talk about that as, that's all great. We love that. Love all of that goes into, why we love cocktails. our whole thing is, maybe alcohol is a part of it, maybe it's not. You just need to have the ability to decide.
Yeah. I wish I had known you 20 years ago. I was at my going away party from leaving the corporate world. And for whatever reason, the CEO was not drinking free spirits and decided that it was her objective was to dance scantily on the top of the table in front of 20 executives of the company. I just remember thinking,
Oh,
someone needs to have a whisper
yeah,
conversation with everybody.
we've all
Yeah.
seen it. We've all been there. As a CEO of a company, I once got into a wrestling match with an employee. Thought that was going to be a good idea. Uh, and you're like, the next day, you're like, huh, not very CEO like of me.
Hmm.
But
I'm fascinated by that shift from corporate to entrepreneur, and I understand the baby steps, and I think it's great. But if we can fast forward past the baby steps to where you are now, what were some of the biggest unknowns that you had when you made that leap? I mean, you went from this advertising to the supply chain and food, and it's not.
yeah,
I can't imagine it was exactly a seamless transition. Can you sort of talk to me some of the biggest unknowns you had in that space?
yeah, I knew none of it. I thought I did. I think I had an idealized view of what it was going to be like. I'm a brand guy. I'm going to build this brand, and I'm a business guy. I know how to, manage a P&L. But I had no idea what I was getting myself to, and even getting our family into. You're starting a business like this, and what you need to put into it. Starting a business, especially a consumer business, you realize that's the easy part. Staying alive is the hard part, and there's been countless learnings, countless screw ups. There has been times of wild fear and worry and horror. And I think that the best piece of advice I got going into it that I didn't really embrace till kind of halfway, that I completely embrace now, is just to really get comfortable being uncomfortable. And you realize discomfort is a sign of something good happening, of evolution, of growth, of innovation, of all of that. There's nothing good that comes from comfort necessarily. And so now we've been down enough dark paths on this, and we've made enough mistakes where I take pride in the scars. um and ultimately have just gotten to a place where I embrace, kind of what the Stoics say, which is, the obstacle is the way. And every time something kind of gets put in our path, it used to kind of be this feeling of existentialism of like, this is the end. Whereas I now have enough experiences where you kind of realize like, no, that's the beginning. That's
Yeah.
that's gonna lead you to something good.
Yeah. I've always, I appreciate that perspective, by the way. You're invited to the fire circle. This whole idea of beginning and end, I've always sort of toiled with this whole idea, we can't go down that channel now, but this whole idea that there is no beginning and there is no end to anything. It's just sort of the process itself. And as you said, becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable. It's a fantastic concept. You've talked about that a little bit in some of the materials I've read about you. You talked about these brushes with death in building business. Can you share one of those sort of brushes with death moments where you thought, bro, this is it. Like, I'm gonna have to turn the keys in.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, everything from the most tactical. So one example is the first year in business, we're selling, the numbers are going up daily. You're looking at the online portals, the numbers are looking really good. And we get into January and the numbers are huge, dry January. And all of a sudden, you start getting a couple of emails from customers. We're like, weird. What's it? Well, it turns out that of the thousands and thousands and thousands of bottles that we were shipping out via UPS ground, because we're non-alcoholic, we don't have alcohol in there. It's our liquid freezes. So
Oh,
we're
that's cool.
basically putting thousands of bottles out there in UPS trucks. They would stop overnight in Des Moines, Iowa, where it would be negative 20 degrees. All the bottles would freeze, they would expand, they would explode, and what would show up to customers was a broken,
Mm.
bag of sharded, wet cardboard glass awfulness. And we didn't have a lot of inventory at the time, and we didn't have the ability to kind of figure out the thermodynamics of how to package things quickly enough. So you got to come up with a solution of, all right, how do we fix this? And one of the most kind of entrepreneurial startup-y situations I can tell you about is you find yourself in some weird situations. And researching it, you're like, all right, how do I ship something, 3 or 4 days across the country and doesn't freeze? Well, apparently, um, if you want to ship your iguana across the country, of all things, you got to keep the thing warm for 3 days. So when you go skiing, there's the hot hands, the chemical bags of
Yeah.
things. Well, there's iguana supply stores that sell those that last 3 days, and so I found myself buying them by the thousands. And so we'd put them in the box to keep it warm. And then of course customers would get it and they would be like, "What is this? Do I cut it open and put it in the cocktail?" You're like, "No, that's not what it's for." So that's a really tactical example of something that almost killed us. But as a result of it, we literally learned the thermodynamics of packaging. We learned the weather patterns. We learned, the how to ship and where to ship and different modes of shipping. And you come out of it, much smarter for it.
That's a fantastic shift. I didn't realize iguana shipping was a thing, so you just enlightened me on that space. So how did you, outside of doing copious amounts of research and understanding thermodynamics and shipping patterns and that sort of stuff, do the boxes themselves now have sort of their own replicatable brand that you're shipping with? Is that something you worked out, or is it just you're still using the iguana?
Yeah, it's how it's how you package the products. It's the material that we use for our packaging that we've updated. There's a ton of innovation that goes into it. It sounds, super unsexy, but just how we package, the materials that we package with, the routes that we ship, the APIs of weather patterns that we feed into our fulfillment systems.
Where are you based? You're in the West Coast, California. Is that what I heard you say?
Or West Coast, yeah.
West Coast, yeah. I want to talk about messaging because messaging goes into that space of where you are right now and how people receive your message and whatnot. You've said that some of your biggest challenges is that people assume that this is only for non-alcoholics, like you've talked about this dry dating space, but you're not really saying that message that I'm hearing you say. This is more of just, again, a reduction, not a mission. How do you reshape that narrative for people who are completely unfamiliar that haven't listened to this podcast?
Yeah, we know that we need to be provocative in our messaging to do that, and there's a couple ways that we've done it so far. We've got a lot of work to do on it. I think from a brand perspective, you might notice our tagline is "Drink like you mean it," and it's this notion that maybe doesn't immediately make perfect sense to somebody, but ultimately what it says is, don't get drunk unintentionally. It's like the challenge with this industry, with the alcoholic industry, is, like I said, most of the badness that comes from alcohol comes just from people like you and I who are like, yeah, we're having a great time, and you've had too many, and you either get behind the wheel or a relationship suffers or you feel like crap the next day. But ultimately this idea of drink like you mean it is, I'm going to drink and I'm going to live this life that I want. And so, how that how that manifests itself out into the world is, like this. So for example, one of the comments we get online persistently from people that don't yet understand the point of the category is, drinking free spirits, drinking non-alcoholic tequila, that's like hiring a hooker for a hug. And I always thought it was a funny comment, albeit a bit off color. We always had kind of
there are people that do that.
100%.
Just hire a hooker for a hug.
That's actually a thing these days, which was part of what we did. And so we actually went.
That's what happens after the dry dating.
That's right.
Sorry, I can't help myself. Sorry.
No, it's all good. Yeah, but so we actually went out and we hired a professional sex worker to give the people of our great city here in the West Coast, San Francisco, give them free hugs. And so they were going around the city giving out free hugs, and exactly to your point, and doing surveys afterwards, like, tell us about that hug. And people were like, that was a great hug, it was the best hug. And so ultimately it's just a bit meant to be a bit provocative, and a bit of a shout back, kind of a slap back at the naysayers of, what, if that's your thing, and if you want to hire, somebody to give you hugs, hey, go for it. That's rad too. There's nothing wrong with that. Hugs or I should say cocktails with or without alcohol, just like sex work with or without, whatever comes next is a choice, and you get to make that, and it's all good.
And studies are now showing that you need at least 12 hugs a day for the proper oxytocin release.
That's a good number. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that is an actual neurological number on the latest data that humans require at least 12 good hugs a day for the proper release of the oxytocin that sort of gives you that feel good, sort of connected mentality. So, maybe we have some branding we need to work on with there. You know what I always think is funny, going back to the first point, not funny, would be really apropos, is how do we get your product on sets, in movies, on production, on TV value, so that people who are, because everybody watches TV, right? How do we get that into the hands of a big name actor or actress on set in some subliminal way, so that the people who are watching that show sort of be like, hey man, I just saw Brad Pitt drinking a free spirit, bro. I got to get up on that, right? So that would be nice.
We're actually, it's funny you mentioned that, because we've got an agency that does that for us, and we're on about 25 sets right now. We're on only Murderers in the Building and Matlock and
Oh, you got it covered. Then you don't need me.
all kinds of that. Yeah, exactly. So it'll be interesting to see how it starts to manifest itself. You'll be sitting there watching a show, you go, it's Brand.
That's funny. And now that I have some sort of observational bias around it, red truck theory, I'll be able to see this if I ever do watch any real TV, which I don't. I mostly watch animal shows and nature shows. So hopefully, unless you can get into that market, I might not see it. It's funny because you're working in an industry, the liquor industry itself, that thrives on this whole idea of tradition. And they've been telling the same message to people for decades. Drinking is sexy. Drinking is cool. All the people who are high and mighty use it. It's good for relaxing, all these sorts of things. But it's going to be, I'm assuming that it's been, especially early in the days before you started getting some traction, that you were disrupting this traditional storytelling model, but at the same time remaining relatable. Was there any sort of strategies that you can recommend for that sort of space, challenging a really hard-born and traditional narrative and sort of stepping in with something new and refreshing and disrupting that, so that people aren't like, what is this that he's trying to talk to me about?
Yeah, I think it comes down to a philosophy I've always employed in life and in business, which is a really simple one, which is it's and, not or, right? This is not us wagging our fingers and saying, the alcohol industry's out to get you. It's terrible. Don't do it. I think this is hey, like we've talked already. It's like, hey, this is a nice addition. And so when it comes to the alcohol industry, early days, a lot of them were like, it seems a little suspect, buddy. And but as it doesn't take long, if you Google that, most of the big alcohol companies now are starting to look at brands like us and make investments, and we're in the middle of talking to some about that kind of a play where they've historically looked out at the entrepreneurs to innovate, and then they've got the infrastructure to scale. So, I think ultimately it's now becoming a thing where the alcohol industry is going, hey, how do we become more of a, adult beverage industry? And adult beverage, has this big thing in it called adult non-alcoholic beverage.
I saw, speaking of that same space, I saw one of the large tobacco, traditionally primarily cigarettes, and I forget the name of who it was. If you say some cigarette companies, I'll remember. But
RJ Reynolds, or what's the Marlboro one, is Astria or Altria or something like that.
Whatever, which one it was, is now spending a massive amount of money on the marijuana space.
Right.
So it's interesting that, for years they decried marijuana, and now they're suddenly realizing that there's endorsable cash to be made. It's all based on cash, right? You're running an e-commerce heavy brand, from what I understand, right? And so, what's worked for you in digital marketing, and where do you still see some opportunities that aren't overly saturated?
Yeah, I think we employ kind of all the usual suspects for customer acquisition. Introducing people to the brand on Facebook and Instagram and Google and all of that. The thing I'm most kind of intrigued by moving forward is just, better, tighter, bigger, more meaningful relationships with influencers, because we've got a couple really great partnerships with a handful of influencers, and they yield really great stuff. And I think what ultimately happens is you realize it's not just customer acquisition. it's customer acquisition, and you're building the brand in a way that is really sustainable. I think that too oftentimes marketers kind of get in this, you know, binary view of, well, that's customer acquisition marketing, and then we got to spend over here to build the brand. But the reality is that over the past 4 or 5 years, we haven't spent a lot of money on pure brand building. But you talk to people and they go, "Oh yeah, no, I know Free Spirits. I like Free Spirits." And I think it's you know it's another one of those ands where, you know, when we go out and we do our customer acquisition marketing, some of the best practices there are huge price point on sale, big percent off, yada yada yada. But we really do it in a way that's, you know, true to our brand, where, you know, we do it in a kind of a tongue-in-cheek, funny, provocative way. And so you're kind of getting, you know, double bang for your buck around, yes, we're driving customer acquisition, but we're also, you know, doing the hard work of, you know, building the brand to the point where when somebody walks into any one of the thousands of retail doors that we're in now, in the Binnies and Bevmo and Safeway and Wegmans and Total Wine and More and Walmart and all of these places, when they get to that shelf and there's, you know, 3 or 4 non-alc spirits brands, how do we make sure that they go, oh, Free Spirits is my brand?
Yeah.
And I think that's the name of the game.
I love what you just said, and I'm just curious, if you had to choose between one of the two, customer acquisition or customer perception, which one do you lean in on?
I mean, I'm a believer that, you know, if you build the right brand and the right relationships with customers, good things will happen. You know, when you're running a business, you don't get to choose one or the other. You got to do both. I mean, I think it was an interesting article recently where Airbnb even stopped spending on performance marketing, you know, and they put it all into brand, and they had a huge positive impact to revenue. You know, I think being a small business, there's realities of you got to keep your daily numbers and all of that kind of stuff. So, you know, I think ultimately we're evolving in how we do it. And you know, there's a lot of, you know, we're still a small team, small brand, small budgets. But I guess to answer your question and more directly, in a perfect world, I'd love to just do the kind of things that would be characterized as, you know, interesting, provocative, creative expressions where people go, oh, that's really, I love that. You know, that's helpful. That's interesting. That's funny. And be able to benefit from, you know, the impact of that on sales.
Yeah, it's interesting because we live in such a heavily saturated market with information at our fingertips now, social media, digital marketing, et cetera, that consumers are really freaking intelligent, right? And so, and they're really smart and latch on really quickly to just inauthentic messaging, inauthentic branding, falsities. And so it's really, you've said it multiple times in this conversation, remaining provocative, remaining unique, remaining sort of benefit driven so that the consumer understands what's in this for me. And I really love that you sort of take that approach. One of the things I see all the time is this category with creators thinking that they assume that education is enough to convert people and create buyers. But in my experience and what I see in study is that education alone doesn't necessarily just drive behavior, identity does. And so that's sort of what I do, right? And I'm getting into this space of helping people craft this identity, right? So if people don't see themselves in the story, they won't buy. That's generally sort of like the takeaway from that. What are you doing to make sure that people can see themselves in that story of drinking Free Spirits or engaging in that market?
Yeah, totally. You know, it's one of my favorite examples of why community is so important, and identity, to your point, is so important in building a brand. Is, as you might be able to tell with my green walls and my green lights and green sweatshirt, I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan. And I grew up in Philadelphia in the 70s and 80s. And I continue to be, you know, I was an Eagles fan back then. I'm an Eagles fan today. The Eagles don't play in the same venue. They don't have the same uniforms. They don't have the same players. They don't have the same coaches, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what is it that I like about them? It's a different team. It's just this idea. And so ultimately, you know, you realize what it is it's being a part of that community. It's calling or texting friends every time a touchdown is scored. It's going out with a group of people and watching. And so, you know, I think ultimately what we're trying to do here is build a community of people around this idea that whether or not you're drinking cocktails, it's the bigger idea behind free spirits is, hey, life's too great to live it any other way other than like the way you want to do it. And historically there's been industries or peer groups or whatever that has tried to kind of say, no, this is the path, like we talked about. But at the end of the day, the brand represents those that go their own way, that kind of make different choices, and we celebrate those kind of people. And so, and those acts of rebellion, big and small, it doesn't necessarily need to be huge acts of rebellion and having a purple mohawk. It can just be like the little things of like, yeah, I just on a Friday night, I don't drink. I drink this kind of a thing. It could be big acts of rebellion of, changing, the country you're living in or the place you're, calling. So at the end of the day, it's really just bringing community around this idea of rebellion, of doing it their own way.
Or not just rebellion, but people have a choice to be a free spirit in how they
exactly.
choose, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
I'm fascinated by that whole concept of. I did a project once for a client who was very big into garment wear and branding and whatnot around that. And one of the things we're really trying to understand is, why do people wear Nike, or why do people wear Adidas? Why would I wear a hoodie with free spirit on? What ties me to the Philadelphia Eagles? What makes me? And so we did a pretty large research around this by just interviewing people and getting data and combining it. And one of the things we found, the number one thing, is similar to what you just said. This idea of community, this idea of an identity where I shared a belief with somebody else, and the camaraderie around knowing that other people also shared that value, that belief. And so it was a really powerful, compelling statement. And so when we presented this data to the CEO, because they thought it was something different, and I argued, I'm like, I think there's something to do with the community space around this. I think that's why people join gangs, that's why people join bands, that's why people like this type of music. It's like they have that group of other value shared individuals that sort of share that space, and they don't have to stand on an island by themselves and be like, no, okay, don't judge me, right? So it's really cool to hear you. Yeah.
Yep.
What's next for the brand? Anything big coming on the horizon that you're working on?
Yeah, 2025 is shaping up to be a really good one. We're adding, a bunch of states. We are looking at expansion into a new country or two across the ocean. We've gotten to, 5 non-alcoholic spirits: bourbon, gin, tequila, a sweet vermouth, and an Italian aperitivo. And then we've got 5 ready to drink cocktails. And so, we'll be adding a couple of different SKUs this year, just to make sure ultimately that people are able to make the cocktails they love, with free spirits. So, we're also talking to a couple of the bigger players about expansion of distribution and all of that kind of stuff. And we're doing our first kind of official, institutional capital raise, which is exciting, to be able to actually pour some fuel on the fire. So it's going to be a good year for us, and ultimately, I think on a more practical note, I just want to make sure that we continue to kind of evolve the products. Like, we're a business that is committed to constant improvement, and that manifests itself in every single batch of our non-alcoholic bourbon we do is a little bit different, a little bit better, a little bit more nuanced. And we're going to continue to kind of take that approach and evolve things to where early days people might have tried our tequila and I'm like, oh, it's okay. These days we think it's pretty darn good. But hopefully next year we get to a place where we look back and we're like, wow, we're in a really even better place now. And so it's exactly as you described, kind of with the Atomic Habits thing. It's just about those like fractional improvements in a consistent way.
Yeah. When I first came across that concept, it blew me away, because I'd always wondered why. Because I set these goals and I was like, I want to do this. And I never got into New Year's resolutions. I've always hated those, but I still like to set targets. But I was always wondering why there was so much heavy traction that I wasn't making in between point A and point B. And when I came across Atomic Habits, it was like a light went off in my brain. I was like, dude, makes total sense. I really appreciate that model. What's the best place for people to find you if they want to check you out and get some information from you? Is there a website, Instagram, social media? What's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, the website is drinkfreespirits.com, and you can find out a lot about the brand there. You can even, buy product there if you want. We ship for free in, 2 or 3 days. Instagram is at Drink Free Spirits, as is most of our, social spaces with TikTok and all that kind of stuff. And hopefully what people experience when they go there is just some humor and some great cocktail ideas, and just a little bit of a taste of who we are relative to living as full of a life as you can without the downsides of it.
You know what would have been nice, Milan, is that if I could be sitting here sipping one of my free spirit bourbons while I'm talking to you. Thanks
Yeah.
for the not shipping before the podcast.
We'll get you some on the back end.
Just joking. If someone is listening, and most of my listeners are listening and have this very question, because it's mostly what I get after shows, is if they're trying to build something and then they sort of get inspired by what you just said, because you've shared a lot of different things centered around provocateur, being unique, being disruptive, being a rebellion. What is one piece of advice in closing that you would give any entrepreneurs trying to build a brand that can stand out, that would be unique to what they're doing, that you think would be like the number one thing they should be focusing on?
Yeah, just start with a blank piece of paper. Embrace the suck, embrace the fear, embrace the discomfort. Start with that blank piece of paper, write down the idea, even if it's 5 minutes. The next day, do it again, do it more, push it forward. The next day, push it a little bit forward. Again, it's the accrued interest thing where, even if you're a little bit every single day, and that doesn't mean you need to jump off a cliff and quit your job. I didn't really walk away from a salary until a year into this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just about those little pieces of progress where, it's you're not jumping off of a cliff. You might be, at the time, you're ready to kind of completely walk away. It might be jumping off of a rock, because it's not as far down, because you've built up, the thing to where it's not nothing.
Close the gap between where you are and where you want to be in small baby steps, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
Milan, it's been a really, and we did it under an hour, so bravo.
Right on.
Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I'd love to stay connected with you. We'll close out the show, and then I'll just drop you some pieces. But any closing thoughts for anybody before you drop?
I love it. No, it was great to spend time with you, man.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you. All right, that's it for today, folks. Thank you. If this episode hit you, like it, subscribe it, leave a review. It helps a lot more than you think, and it helps the right people find this show and help us keep growing so we can continue to produce amazing episodes. You can find me at thebrandstoryteller.com if you're interested in connecting with me, and everything else about this episode, the guest, the websites, the social media handles, they are all linked below. I'll see you in the next show.